Well, South Korean doctors have continued their demonstrations against the government's plan to increase medical school admissions.
Now, at the center of the dispute is a recent government announcement that universities would admit 2,000 more medical students from the next academic year. Hundreds of senior doctors held a rally near the presidential office in Seoul. The government says it aims to add up to 10,000 doctors by 2035 to address what it calls a shortage of doctors in the country's fast-aging population.
But doctors say that higher medical school admissions will only lower the overall medical education level in South Korea, and it will not solve the resource imbalance. Now, before the rally, the doctors gathered at a meeting held by the Korean Medical Association. The association has requested the government to cancel the plan.
At this point, our goal is to make the government realize it is a wrong policy and urge them to start the dialogue from the beginning. I think it is the collective goal of 140,000 doctors. I believe that myself, the emergency committee and 140,000 doctors will voluntarily work together until that goal is achieved.
Through the week, collective walkouts of nearly 10,000 doctors have caused cancellations of surgeries and disrupted other hospital operations. It has raised concerns that more patients may miss the time for treatment as the stalemate continues. The medical center and the Samsung Medical Center said they have cut the number of surgeries by over 40%. A few patients said they had been asked to leave the hospital as soon as possible. The South Korean government has said that it will continue implementing the policy and take prompt judicial action against the doctors' resignation. It has warned the striking doctors to return to work immediately or face legal action. In response, the association has vowed continued protests.
Well, they argue that South Korea's population will continue shrinking due to the low birth rate, so there will be no shortage of doctors. But the decline in birth rate is alarming. South Korea has the lowest fertility rate in the world. In 2020, the number of deaths had already exceeded the number of births. It's also important to mention here that South Korea's doctor-to-patient ratio is among the lowest in the world, particularly in pediatrics and emergency departments and in rural areas as well.
The protests have thereby failed to generate public support, with a survey suggesting about 75% of South Koreans support the government's push to train more doctors. All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by our Voice of America correspondent, Bill Gallo, who's live from Seoul. Bill, welcome to World DNA. Wanted to get your opinion on this. If you can give us a better understanding of what's happening on ground. And, of course, this is the first time in South Korea's history that public health alert has been raised to severe. Can you give us a better sense of what's happening there?
Well, many hospitals are definitely overcrowded. I don't want to minimize this. However, it's important to note that these are trainee doctors. Senior doctors are still on the job. They're still working. I think that these senior doctors have a lot of solidarity with their striking junior colleagues. But, most emergency medical care is still being done. There are long waits, especially at certain hospitals where there are more trainees, sort of training hospitals. And one way to look at this is sort of what my wife experienced this weekend when she needed to go to the doctor for a minor kind of throat and cough issue. She was told, to see a doctor, she needed to wait 2 or 3 hours. So for minor things like that, yes, it's very much of a nuisance. At certain hospitals, it may even be more serious than that. But most, or if not all, senior doctors are still on the job, and they're still doing, the emergency, very vital procedures at this point.
Right, will you speak of how you've narrated that anecdote that happened with your wife and how the situation there in South Korea is now affecting the people. My question to you is that why should there be a protest at government plans to raise the number of trainee medics? Where exactly is the disagreement?
Right, I mean, it is sort of an interesting question. There is agreement on one issue, I would say. Pretty much everyone agrees there is a shortage of doctors. South Korea, of course, has very famously good health care, famously cheap health care. But as is often the case in developed countries where there is good health care, people tend to overuse that. And so when you go to the hospital, even in normal times here, it can be very crowded, and you do get the sense that there is a shortage of personnel. Now, what doctors say is they're not getting paid enough, and they have poor working conditions. So what the government has decided to do to fix this is to basically add more workers into the pipeline. The idea there, the doctors fear, is that this will essentially not only not create better conditions and better pay, it will actually lead to worse conditions and worse pay, according to the doctors. Doctors think, the solution here is to make structural changes, to raise the pay, to make the conditions better, have not such long working hours, and that this would sort of naturally attract more doctors into the system. However, the public is very supportive, I must say, of the government's moves at this point, because most people experience this not as a doctor, but as a patient.
Bill, now, the assembly elections are scheduled in April. They're right around the corner. Do you feel the current situation is going to have some political ramifications here as well?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know that the strike will impact the elections as much as the elections will likely impact the strike and the labor situation. There is a sense here that perhaps the government knows that it has the public support for its plan to increase the number of trainee doctors. I think the doctors also know that as well. I think they think that if they can hold out for another month until these elections, or so, another month or so until these elections, perhaps after the election, both sides, or perhaps especially the government, will be more likely to give in. So I think we're in it for another few weeks here, at least until this election happens, and then we'll have to see. But it's certainly not going to get better, I don't think, in another day or two.
All right, that was Bill Gallo, our Voice of America correspondent, joining us live from Seoul. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights.
Thank you.